The wine glass caught the candlelight like blood. Lorenzo Damari lifted it slowly, the expensive crystal turning between his fingers as the restaurant fell into its usual hushed reverence. Rain hammered against the tall windows of La Ceradoro, each drop a tiny explosion against the glass. Thunder rolled somewhere over Lake Michigan, distant but coming closer. The jazz trio in the corner played something soft and melancholy, the kind of music that made rich men feel cultured and dangerous men feel civilized. Elena Russo's hand froze on the serving tray. She saw it from across the dining room. The label, the specific curve of handwriting on the cork, the way the sommelier's hands trembled just slightly as he poured. Her father's handwriting. She would know it anywhere, even after 6 years of trying to forget. The bottle wasn't supposed to be here. That vintage wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Her throat went dry. The tray shook in her hands. Lorenzo brought the glass toward his lips, his dark eyes scanning the room with the bored confidence of a king surveying his kingdom. Men in expensive suits watched him from every corner, their hands resting near jacket pockets that definitely didn't hold wallets. The air smelled like garlic and wine and money, the kind of money that came with consequences. "Don't drink that." Her voice cracked the silence like a gunshot. Every head in the restaurant turned. The jazz trio stopped mid-note. Silverware clattered against plates. A woman gasped. The sommelier's face went white as fresh mozzarella. "Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story." Elena's legs felt like water. What had she just done? The words had come out of her mouth before her brain could stop them, before fear could wrap its hands around her vocal cords and squeeze. Now 24 pairs of eyes stared at her. Some confused, some amused, most calculating how quickly her body could disappear into the Chicago River. Lorenzo Damari didn't move. He held the glass suspended in the air, inches from his lips, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker. Something interested. 3 men in dark suits stood up simultaneously, their chairs scraping against the marble floor. Hands moved toward concealed weapons. The head of security, a mountain of a man named Enzo, was already crossing the room toward her, his face carved from granite and fury. But Lorenzo raised one finger, just one, and everyone froze. The restaurant held its breath. Rain continued to batter the windows. The candles flickered. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Lorenzo set the glass down on the white tablecloth. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying than any shout could have been. "Bring her to me." 3 weeks earlier, Elena had stood in this same restaurant with a borrowed black dress and shoes that pinched her feet. The manager had looked her up and down like she was a stain on his marble floor. "You'll work the side stations. Don't speak to the VIP guests unless they speak first. Don't make eye contact with Mr. Damari. Don't ask questions. Understand." She'd understood perfectly. She needed this job more than she needed dignity. Her mother's medication cost $400 a month. The rent was 2 weeks overdue. The electricity company had sent a final notice. Elena worked double shifts at a diner on the south side, came home smelling like bacon grease and broken dreams, and still couldn't make the numbers work. When she'd seen the job posting for La Ceradoro, she'd known it was dangerous. Everyone in Chicago knew what kind of restaurant it was, what kind of man owned it. But desperation makes cowards of us all. Her father used to say that. Back when he was alive, back when their small apartment smelled like his cheap cologne and her mother's laugh filled every room. Giovanni Russo had worked at a vineyard outside the city, his hands stained purple from grape skins, his smile wide despite the long hours. He taught Elena about wine the way other fathers taught their daughters about baseball, with passion and pride. Then one day, he came home with fear in his eyes. "I can't do what they want," he told her mother that night, not knowing Elena was listening from the hallway. "They want me to tamper with a shipment, poison someone's wine. I won't do it. I won't." 2 weeks later, he was dead. Heart attack, the doctor said. But Elena had seen the bruises on his ribs when they dressed him for the funeral. Now, she carried trays for the kind of men who made people disappear. On her third day at La Ceradoro, she'd been refilling water glasses in the kitchen when she heard two chefs talking in rapid Italian. She'd learned enough from her father to catch the important words: special bottle, boss's dinner, Sicily, private vintage. One of them noticed her listening and went quiet. The other smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Something about that conversation felt wrong, felt familiar, felt like her father's last days all over again. The next morning, she saw the delivery truck pull up to the restaurant's back entrance. Watched the sommelier sign for a wooden crate marked with a vineyard name she recognized. Her father's old vineyard, the one that fired him, the one now owned by men who settled disputes with bullets instead of lawyers. She recognized the wine's origin immediately. Her father's old vineyard, now controlled by criminals. Would you stay silent if speaking up meant risking everything you had left? Lorenzo Damari didn't sleep well. Most people assumed men like him slept like babies, their consciences too dead to cause nightmares. They were wrong. He spent most nights in his study, reading Dante in the original Italian, smoking cigarettes he'd promised himself he'd quit, watching the city lights blink like dying stars. Power was supposed to feel good. It mostly felt heavy. At 38, he controlled half the restaurants in Chicago, 3 construction companies, 2 unions, and more politicians than he could count. His word could end careers, marriages, lives. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. Mothers pulled their children closer. Priests made the sign of the cross. But nobody really saw him. They saw the suits, the cars, the bodyguards. They saw the rumors and the legend. They didn't see the man who still remembered his grandmother's meatballs, who'd cried at his sister's wedding, who sometimes wondered what his life would have looked like if he'd chosen law school instead of the family business. His inner circle was small. Enzo, his bodyguard since they were teenagers, built like a tank and twice as loyal. Matteo, his consigliere, smart enough to be dangerous and wise enough to stay useful. And Sophia, beautiful Sophia with her red lips and expensive perfume and eyes that promised everything while delivering nothing. He knew she was cheating on him, probably with the accountant, maybe with Matteo. Lorenzo wasn't sure he cared anymore. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Trust was even more expensive. But lately, his instincts had been screaming. Small things. A conversation that stopped when he entered the room. Files that weren't quite where he'd left them. Sophia making phone calls behind closed doors, her voice too quiet, too urgent. The dinner tonight was a test. He'd let it slip to different people that he'd be dining alone, celebrating a business deal, drinking a rare vintage from Sicily. He'd told Enzo one thing, Matteo another, Sophia something else entirely. Now he'd see which story came back to bite him. His phone buzzed. Sophia's name on the screen. "I'll be late tonight," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Shopping with the girls." "Of course," he replied, watching her through the security camera feed on his laptop. She was in a restaurant's back office, alone, making this call, lying beautifully. Tonight would reveal everything. He adjusted his tie, slipped his phone into his pocket, and headed downstairs. The restaurant was already full. The usual collection of made men and wannabes, politicians and their mistresses, people who paid in cash and never left receipts. Lorenzo took his usual table by the window. Thunder rumbled outside. The sommelier approached with a special bottle, hands shaking slightly. Lorenzo raised his glass to toast, the poison wine that Elena would soon stop him from drinking. Would you trust anyone if you ruled a world built on fear? Time moved like honey. Elena watched Lorenzo's hand lift the glass, watched the dark wine catch the light, watched his lips begin to part. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. The tray crashed against a busboy's shoulder. Someone cursed. She was running, not walking, her cheap shoes slapping against the marble. "Don't drink that." The words ripped out of her throat like they'd been waiting there for 6 years. The restaurant transformed into a freeze frame. Forks suspended over pasta. Conversations cut mid-sentence. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if the whole city wanted to hear what happened next. Lorenzo's eyes found hers across the room. Dark eyes, calculating eyes, eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. Elena's hands trembled so badly she had to clasp them together. Her breath came in short gasps. What had she done? She just screamed at the most dangerous man in Chicago. In his own restaurant. In front of his people. She was dead. She was so incredibly dead. But then she saw it. A flicker of something in his expression. Not anger. Curiosity. Enzo was moving toward her like a freight train, his massive frame cutting through the tables. Other men stood up, their jackets falling open to reveal shoulder holsters. The air went electric with violence about to happen. But Lorenzo raised one finger. Everything stopped. He set the wine glass down carefully, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with Elena. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent room like a prayer in an empty church. Come here. Elena's legs refused to move. Terror had turned her muscles to stone. Now, he added, and somehow the word was worse than any threat. She walked. Each step felt like walking toward an execution. The other diners stared at her with pity or amusement or both. Enzo positioned himself between her and Lorenzo, one hand resting on something under his jacket. Lorenzo gestured for her to come closer. She did, her whole body shaking. Why? He asked simply. Her voice came out as a whisper. The seal on the cork. It's tampered. I saw the delivery truck this morning. That vintage, her voice cracked. That vineyard killed my father. Something shifted in Lorenzo's face. Understanding. Then something darker. He looked at Enzo. Take her to the back. Gently. Nobody touches her. To Elena, he said quietly, we're going to talk. But first, he picked up his phone, dialed a number. Marco, test the wine I was about to drink. Everything. Call me in 10 minutes. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Elena one more time. Bring her to my office. If you were in her place, would you tell the truth or protect yourself? Lorenzo's office smelled like leather and secrets. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, rain streaming down the glass like the city was crying. Dark wood furniture, expensive art that Elena didn't recognize, a desk that probably cost more than her entire life. She stood in the middle of the room, still shaking, while Lorenzo poured himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her one. He drank slowly, studying her over the rim of the glass. Sit, he finally said, gesturing to a chair. Elena sat. Her legs were grateful. He circled around to lean against his desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and dangerous. Tell me about your father. So she did. The words tumbled out like a confession, like she'd been holding them in for 6 years, and they finally had permission to escape. She told him about Giovanni Russo, about the vineyard, about the night her father came home scared, about the funeral with too many flowers and not enough answers. He worked at Castellano Vineyards, she said, her voice steadier now. They wanted him to do something with the wine. Something wrong. He refused. She looked up at Lorenzo. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Lorenzo's expression didn't change. Castellano Vineyards. Antonio Castellano. Yes, that vineyard supplies my restaurants. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. Elena's blood went cold. The bottle tonight, she continued, forcing herself to meet his eyes. I saw the delivery this morning. Same vineyard, but the seal was wrong. My father taught me about wine. The real stuff, not the expensive garbage people buy to show off. That cork was tampered with. Someone opened it, added something, resealed it. Poorly. Lorenzo watched her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. You know who I am. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. You're the man everyone fears. And yet you shouted at me, in front of my people, in my restaurant. Even fear deserves truth. The words hung in the air between them. Lorenzo's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Something human beneath the armor. His phone rang. He answered without looking away from her. Marco, talk to me. Whatever Marco said made Lorenzo's jaw tighten. He listened for 30 seconds, then hung up. Strychnine, he said quietly. Enough to kill a horse. In the wine I was about to drink. Elena felt the room spin. Lorenzo turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Something almost like vulnerability. Someone wanted me dead tonight. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. And you just changed the plan? Would you still tell the truth if it meant standing face to face with danger? Lorenzo kept Elena at the restaurant that night, under what he called protection and what anyone else would call house arrest. She sat in a storage room converted into a makeshift office, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, while men in expensive suits moved through the building like sharks circling prey. She could hear fragments of conversation through the walls, names, accusations, the sound of furniture being moved. They were hunting for the traitor. Around midnight, Lorenzo appeared in the doorway. He looked tired in a way that made him seem almost human. He gestured for her to follow him to a private dining room where files and documents covered an entire table. "You're good with details," he said. "Help me." Elena stared at the papers. Invoices, shipping manifests, employee schedules. 6 months of restaurant operations laid out like a map to someone's betrayal. She started sorting through them, her hands still shaking but her mind clearing. Numbers had always made sense to her, more sense than people. Within an hour, she'd found a pattern. Wine shipments that didn't match inventory, deliveries signed for by people who weren't working that day, payments to Castellano vineyards that were triple the normal amount. "Here," she said, pointing to his signature. This person authorized every suspicious shipment. Lorenzo leaned over her shoulder to look. His face went stone cold. The signature belonged to Sophia. Elena watched him process this information. Watched something die behind his eyes. Not love, maybe, but the ghost of what love used to be. "She's been here tonight," he said quietly. Said she was shopping. Elena remembered something. "I saw her on my break. In the back office. She was on her phone." Lorenzo pulled out his own phone, made a call. "Bring me Sophia's cell. Now, don't tell her." 10 minutes later, Enzo arrived with a designer purse. Lorenzo went through it with surgical precision. Found the phone. Unlocked it. He knew the code, of course he did. Started scrolling through messages. His jaw clenched tighter with each swipe. Elena watched his face change. Watched betrayal settle into the lines around his mouth. He turned the phone toward her, showing her a text conversation. "The wine will end him tonight. Be ready to move the accounts tomorrow." The message was sent to a number saved under a man's name, followed by heart emojis, followed by plans for a future that didn't include Lorenzo breathing. Elena felt sick. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Lorenzo's voice was ice. "You saved my life." She tried to end it. He made another call. "Bring Sophia to my office. Tell her I need to discuss tonight's menu for next week. Keep it casual." He looked at Elena. "You should go home. This doesn't concern you anymore." But Elena thought about her father, about 6 years of unanswered questions, about justice that never came. "It does concern me. That vineyard, the one that supplied the poison. They killed my father when he wouldn't do exactly what she just tried to do." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay then. Watch what real consequences look like." 20 minutes later, Sophia walked into the office wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lorenzo confronted Sophia privately, her trembling confession confirming everything. Can love and loyalty exist in a world built on lies? Sophia's confession spilled out like wine from a broken bottle. She'd been planning this for 8 months. Her lover was Antonio Castellano's nephew, the same vineyard owner who'd had Elena's father killed. They'd been siphoning money from Lorenzo's accounts, building a new life in Argentina, just waiting for the right moment to make Lorenzo disappear. "The wine was poetic," she said, her voice shaking. "Antonio's specialty. Untraceable after a few hours. They'd say you had a heart attack, just like that vineyard worker who wouldn't cooperate." Elena's hands formed fists. That vineyard worker was her father. Lorenzo stood by the window, his back to both of them, silent as a grave. Elena expected an explosion. Violence. The kind of brutal justice Chicago whispered about in dark corners. Instead, he turned around and his voice was calm. Too calm. "You know what's interesting about betrayal?" he said. "Everyone thinks death is the worst punishment. It's not. Death is mercy. Death is forgetting. He walked closer to Sophia, who shrank back in her chair. Memory that hurts longer. He made a phone call. Freeze all accounts under Sophia Marchesi's name. Contact her family in Naples. Tell them exactly what she did. Send copies of her text messages to every social club, every restaurant, every business from here to New York. Make sure everyone knows she's a traitor and a thief. Sophia's face went white. Lorenzo, please. I'm not finished. His voice could have cut glass. Sell her apartment, her car, her jewelry, every designer bag, every expensive coat. Donate it all to a women's shelter in my mother's name. Leave her enough money for a one-way bus ticket to anywhere that isn't Chicago. He leaned down to her eye level. Blood is too easy. I prefer memory. It hurts longer. Sophia was crying now, mascara running down her face like war paint washing away. Enzo escorted her out, her designer heels clicking against the marble one last time. Elena stood in the corner, processing what she'd just witnessed. Justice without violence. Punishment without blood. It was mercy and cruelty wrapped together, impossible to separate. Lorenzo poured 2 glasses of whiskey, real whiskey this time, not poison wine. He handed one to Elena. She took it with shaking hands. Your father, he said, sitting down heavily. Giovanni Russo. Elena's heart stopped. You knew him? Not personally, but I knew about him. Antonio Castellano came to me 6 years ago, wanted permission to handle a problem at his vineyard. An employee who wouldn't cooperate with a business arrangement. Lorenzo took a long drink. I told him to fire the man, not harm him. Antonio didn't listen. The room spun. Elena gripped the glass tighter. I didn't know he'd killed your father until tonight. Didn't know the details. But I should have. Lorenzo looked at her directly. Your father refused to poison a rival's wine. Just like you stopped me from drinking poison tonight. Silence stretched between them like a wound. I owe him my life, Lorenzo said quietly. Twice. Do you believe justice always needs revenge? The next 3 days passed in a blur of police statements and federal investigators. Lorenzo had decided to cooperate with the authorities regarding Antonio Castellano's vineyard operations. Not out of conscience, Elena suspected, but out of cold calculation. Castellano had tried to kill him. That required consequences that went beyond Sophia's social exile. Elena gave her statement about her father's death, about the tampered wine, about everything she'd witnessed. For the first time in 6 years, someone was actually listening. On the 4th day, Lorenzo asked to meet her privately. They sat in his office again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Quieter, heavy with words that hadn't been spoken yet. I need to tell you something, he began, and Elena felt her stomach drop. Your father's vineyard job, the one he lost. I'm the one who gave Antonio Castellano the contract that put him in charge of that business. Elena's blood ran cold. I didn't order your father's death. I didn't even know his name until you told me. But I created the circumstances that made it possible. I put a monster in charge of something valuable, and your father paid the price for my bad judgment. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. All this time, she'd been working for the man whose decisions had destroyed her family. She'd save his life. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I can't bring him back, Lorenzo continued, his voice rough. I can't undo 6 years of your pain. But I can do something. He slid an envelope across the desk. Elena opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a property deed. The old Castellano Vineyards, now renamed Russo Vineyards. Ownership transferred to Elena Maria Russo, effective immediately. Fully operational, fully staffed, all debts cleared. It's yours, Lorenzo said. Your father's dream. The land he worked. The vines he cared for. It should have always belonged to your family. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The paper shook in her hands. I don't want your forgiveness, he added. I don't deserve it, but I want you to have what was stolen from you. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why? Because you're the first honest person I've met in 20 years. Because your father died refusing to do what I've built an empire doing. Because maybe he stopped searching for words. Maybe it's time to plan something good instead of burning everything down. Elena stood up, the deed clutched against her chest. She walked to the door, then turned back. "The past cannot change," she whispered, echoing his note. "But the soil can heal." She left without another word, leaving Lorenzo alone in his office with his expensive whiskey and his expensive regrets. Would you forgive someone who destroyed your family if they tried to make it right? 8 months later, Elena stood in the vineyard at sunrise. The vines had grown thick and healthy under her care, their leaves bright green in the early morning light. The soil smelled rich and alive, nothing like the fear and death that had poisoned this place before. She'd hired back the workers Antonio had treated like slaves, paid them fair wages, learned their names and their stories. Her mother was healthy now, the expensive medications finally affordable. They'd moved into the small house on the vineyard property, the one her father had always dreamed of living in. Sometimes Elena would wake up and forget, just for a moment, that he was gone. Then she'd remember and the grief would come, but softer now. Less like drowning, more like rain. She was testing the first harvest of the season when she heard a car coming up the gravel drive. A black sedan. No bodyguards this time. Just Lorenzo, climbing out alone, dressed in jeans and a simple white shirt instead of his usual $1,000 suits. He looked different, smaller somehow, more human. "I heard the harvest was ready," he said, walking toward her. "Thought I'd come taste it, if that's okay." Elena studied him for a moment, then nodded. She led him to the tasting room. A converted barn with wooden tables and sunlight streaming through high windows. She poured 2 glasses of the new wine, her hand steady now. Lorenzo tasted it carefully, like a prayer. His eyes closed. When he opened them, there were tears there. "It's perfect," he whispered. "Your father would be proud." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 broken people in a room full of light, drinking wine made from soil that had seen too much darkness and somehow grown something beautiful anyway. "I heard you turned over 3 of your businesses to the feds," Elena said quietly. "That you're cooperating with investigations." Lorenzo nodded. "Seemed like the right time. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of making other people afraid." He looked at her. "You changed something in me that night. When you shouted across that restaurant, you weren't afraid of consequences. You just did what was right. I was terrified, but you did anyway. That's what courage actually is." Elena smiled, the first real smile she'd had in years. "What will you do now?" "I don't know yet. Something legitimate. Something I can be proud of." He raised his glass. "To new harvests." "To new harvests," Elena echoed. They drank together as the sun climbed higher. 2 people who'd saved each other in different ways, who'd found something pure in soil that had been poisoned with lies. "You saved me from more than poison that night," Lorenzo said softly. Elena met his eyes. "And maybe from yourself. Can broken people still build something pure together?" The old man finished his story as rain tapped against the windows of the vineyard's tasting room. The young workers who'd gathered to listen sat in silence, processing everything they'd heard. Outside, the vines swayed in the storm wind, heavy with fruit ready for harvest. "Is it true?" one of them finally asked. "Did that really happen?" The old man smiled, his weathered face crinkling. "Every word. I was there. Used to work for Lorenzo back in Chicago, before he changed his life. Before a shy waitress reminded him what courage looked like. He stood up slowly, his joints protesting, and walked to the window. Through the rain, they could see the main house where Elena Russo still lived, now in her 30s, her mother beside her on the porch, both of them watching the storm. "What happened to Lorenzo?" another worker asked. "He sold everything. Testified against half the crime families in Chicago. Spent 2 years in witness protection. When he came out, he started a restaurant. A legitimate one this time. Just pasta and wine and honest work. Last I heard, he's happy." "Did they ever?" The young woman hesitated. "Did Elena and Lorenzo ever become something more?" The old man shook his head. "Some stories aren't about romance. They're about redemption. About 2 people who met at the worst moment of their lives and somehow made each other better. That's a different kind of love. Quieter, but just as real." He picked up a bottle of Russo Vineyards wine, held it to the light. "She never raised her voice again after that night. Didn't have to. The world learned to listen. The storm grew stronger outside, thunder rolling across the hills. But inside the tasting room, surrounded by wine that grew from soil once poisoned by greed and fear, the workers felt something else. Hope, maybe. Justice. The possibility that broken things could heal if you gave them time and honest work. The old man poured wine for everyone, the dark liquid catching the lamplight. "Remember this," he said, raising his glass. "Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it whispers through the courage of one honest soul. Sometimes one person standing up for what's right can change everything." They drank together as the rain fell, the storm washing everything clean. If this story touched you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more incredible true stories of courage and redemption coming soon. Drop a comment below about a time you spoke up when it mattered, even when you were afraid. Your story might inspire someone else to find their voice. Because courage deserves to be remembered, and your voice matters.